Thank you
Hi.
so much for being here today. We're so grateful we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks so much for having me, Courtney. I love your podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on it. My name's Danila Botha. I'm a Canadian writer. I'm based in Toronto. My new collection of short stories is called Things That Cause Inappropriate Happiness. And I just realized that I don't need to show the camera because we're not doing this live. Um, it's my third collection of short stories. My first was called Got No Secrets, and my second was called For All the Men and Some of the Women I've Known. And it's actually going to be reissued next year by my publisher, Grenica Editions. It came out with a different publisher in Canada that folded a couple years ago, so I'm really happy they're reissuing. I'm also the author of a novel called Too Much on the Inside, which came out in 2015 and was licensed and was the film rights were sold last year. So I'm really excited about that. And then I have a new novel called A Place for People Like Us that's coming out next fall with Grenica Editions too.
Amazing. I would love if you could tell us more about what your books are about.
For sure, I would love to. So my new book, So Things That Cause Inappropriate Happiness, is a collection of 32 short stories. Short stories are my favorite medium by far. And I know you write short stories too, so I'm excited to talk about short fiction with you. I just love the form so much. I love the economy of the form. I love how tight and compact it is, and I love how that means you have to be really deliberate about everything you write and about the way you position and the way you do characterization and voice, and you have to always think about the way everything is moving a story, and you have to with a novel too, to a certain degree. But with short fiction, I like how deliberate you have to be. So it's this is a collection of 32 short stories. It's has a lot about identity, and a lot of the characters are artists or writers or musicians, photographers, and they kind of wrestle with questions of who they are. There's a lot of Jewish themes in it too, because I'm Jewish, and that comes up in a bunch of stories. The title story, Things That Cause Inappropriate Happiness, was actually inspired by a real life side effect of prednisone. Um, I have rheumatoid arthritis, like the character in the story. Obviously, it's a work of fiction, but that part is true. And I remember years ago, like seeing inappropriate happiness on. I was having a big flare, so I was given all this prednisone to take, and I remember thinking how bizarre that was. And then that became a big part of the story. Ask me anything. There's 32
No,
stuff.
you're fine. No, that's I just smiled about it because I'm allergic to prednisone. So
Oh
I
wow,
can see
okay.
where you're coming from with that
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It works so well as far as like anti-inflammatory treatments go, but it has so many terrible side effects. But inappropriate happiness, like that one, made me laugh. Like I thought, what does that even mean? And I imagined like rheumatologists and doctors like lining up to decide if someone is too happy, or like trying to determine what that would look like or what that would be. I also had a really fun time with that story because it has like I'm going to be 42 soon, so I was a teenager like 20 years ago, so like or more. I had a lot of fun doing like a flashback to the 90s. Like the character gets taken back to a certain period of time in her life, and that was really fun to do. It was fun to like think back to 90s pop culture and 90s fashion and all those kinds of things. And I love Leonard Cohen, so that was a really fun part of the story to write also. Um,
Love that. What inspired you to write your book?
this book, Things That Cause Inappropriate Happiness, I'm always writing short stories. Like I find myself constantly working on them, even when I don't think I have a project in mind. I'm always writing short stories. So the earliest stories in the collection, the first story in the collection, which is about a photographer, and it's called Sometimes I Like to Shoot Kids, but it's about a photographer. I always feel like I need to explain that. Was one of the very first stories that I wrote a long time ago, and it appeared in this Canadian anthology called Changing the Face of Canadian Literature that my publisher, Guernica, published a few years ago. I think it came out during the pandemic. My friend Dane Swan, who's a writer in multiple genres and really amazing, was the editor. And there's so many amazing writers that got to be part of this. It was a really amazing anthology. I was really glad to be part of it. And Humber Literary Review, which is another local literary magazine, published the story Aloha State. And those were like the first two stories. And then everything sort of came from there. My publisher, Michael Mirola, who was my editor also, who was really amazing to work with. So when I first sent him Things That Caused Inappropriate Happiness, it was about half the length. And as we worked together, like I'd send him middle of the night emails. We're both like late night. We both work well late at night. So like I'd send him an email at 12 and he'd answer me at 12:15 and like this we'd be going this would be going on and on. And I'd say, you know what, I have this idea for a story I want to write. Or you know what, this literary magazine wants to publish this story. Can I add it to the collection? Or what do you think if I add this or that? And he'd say, like, I don't know, it sounds interesting, but like you should really add it to the manuscript and send it to me, or work a little more, see if you have more stories you want to add. And the collection mushroomed, like we went from 18 or 19 stories to 32. And then eventually it was like, okay, let's save it for the next one.
Love that. Is there a specific reason you picked 32?
Um, yeah, my publicist said stop. Um, uh, no, not really, actually. It's a good question, but no, not really. I think I felt like there was enough that connected the stories in terms of theme and subject and characters and things. And then at a certain point, like I think it would have been a lot. Like I think the length was good. But really, my editor, Michael, made that call.
Love it. When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
That's a great question. The honest truth is, and I don't know if this is a bad answer, I try not to think about audience when I write because I find it would be paralyzing. I really hope that I have readers, and I'm so unbelievably grateful for the response to this book. Like this is like the fourth printing,
Love
and
that.
I know I'm so grateful. I'm so unbelievably grateful. Um, and for like we were like nominated for something recently, it's I'm very, very grateful for all of these things. And I'm grateful for the reviews, which thank God have been really positive and supportive. Like, no, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the reception for sure. But if I think about it in the moment, like if I imagine people reading it, I would be so critical of every single line. I don't think I could work.
Love that.
Um I guess the ideal reader would just be anyone who reads it closely. And whether they love it or they hate it, they're just thinking about it deeply and they're reading it closely. I guess like that's all you can hope for, like if they like it or if the worst is like, people that are like, oh, I tried and I didn't finish it. You're like, no, you're entitled not to like it. You're entitled not to finish it. But you're like, I just want, if you loved it, if you hated it, I just want, I think every writer just wants to be read.
Love that. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Oh, that's a good question. Pretty much my whole life. I was in grade school and I was in grade 3. I had this really amazing teacher. Shout out to Mrs. Natelovitz. Um, and she no, we're in touch today, she knows. But she was amazing. And we used to talk about books all the time because she read a lot when I was a kid. I started reading when I was really young. Like, I think I was 3 or 4 or something when I started reading, and my parents were very into books, so, like, there's always books in the house, and, I started coming up with these stories instead of doing my work during class, and instead of being like, "Oh, this kid is, like, imaginary friends, and she's in grade 3, or this kid is, like what's wrong with this kid?" She was just like, "This is so cool. Have you ever thought of writing this down? Like, have you ever thought of writing down these stories? Your imagination is amazing. Like, have you ever" and I was like, "No, that's a thing?" And she's like, "Yeah, like, that's what writers do, like, of course." And I thought, "Wow, that's so cool." So I remember I wrote my very first short stories in her class, but then I didn't, I was more of a big reader and I kept, like I wrote diaries, I wrote poetry, I wrote things when I was younger, but my first publications actually was when I was 16. I published in like local music magazines, like I reviewed bands and that kind of thing. Um, it's a kind of a funny story. Like I applied to art school because I have a background in visual arts and to journalism school, and I had a great portfolio because I had published in magazines by the time I was applying, and but when I did my interview, which at what was the best journalism school in Toronto at the time, um, they asked me like what I see myself doing in the future. And I said creative writing, and then I was shocked that I didn't get into the program. Probably not what you wanna tell th so I went to art school, and a year into art school at York University in Toronto, I found out that there's a creative writing program. I didn't even know, and at the time, it started in 2nd year. It didn't start in 1st year, so I applied, and I was really grateful I got in, and one of the short stories that was I wrote to get into the program, I wrote it on the 196 bus going home from school, ended up being in my collection for all the men and some of the women I've known. It's a story called Another Other, and it ended up being in my 3rd book, so I was really, really happy about that. But yeah, no, it was a great program. I learned a lot, and then I did right now, I'm part of the faculty at Humber School for Writers in Toronto, and I did the program in 2005, the year that I graduated from my undergrad, and it was amazing, and I learned so much. And my first book came out in 2010 or 2000. I think it was, yeah, 2010. So I was like 26. So those were mostly my thesis from my undergrad. Like it was mostly my short stories that I wrote in my undergrad creative writing and in the program at School for Writers.
Love that. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Um, I try to write as much as I can. I'm not someone who says you have to write every single day or you have to like it's because you know what like I mean I'm married, I have 3 kids. It's not always realistic. Like it's and I teach and like it's not like I mean I work with writers, but it's not always possible to write every single day. But I read every single day if I don't write. I was reading about Lauren Groff about how she reads for 2 or 3 hours a day every single day as part of her practice, and that made me feel much better and much less like I should be productive on paper all the time. I'm usually writing short stories even if I'm not consciously working on a collection, so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm also we're doing edits on my novel. It depends on the deadline. It depends on how soon things have to be finished by. And there's like you can impose artificial deadlines to get yourself to work through fear and just write things down and just get things done. And that's different if you're taking time for like things to gestate or to think about the process, which is, or the editing process can take time too. Depends on like how deep I am in the process, and it depends on um like, what needs to be done at the time, but I find with short stories, like, the hours just fly by, and I love it, and I'm having such a good time, and I never have a really bad day, even if I'm really struggling with something, like, I'm struggling with a story right now, but even the worst days are really good days with short stories. I find with novels, like, the bad days make me wanna put my head through the computer. Like, I'm like, "This problem is so large, and I just do not know how to solve it." Like this whole I have to change from, like, 1st to 3rd person? That's enormous, or, like, I have to and, like, it feels so much easier to contain in a short story.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Ooh, good question. You have all the great questions. Um, mm, Not much. I have a lot of books beside me, like, I like to have books that the ones that I need to reference to do what I'm doing. I try not to spend too much time on the internet, although it's a great place to research. Like, now you can find everything, like, you can the searches writers do are so weird, but, like, you can, like, find exactly what like, on Google Street View, like, exactly what the street looked like 5 years ago or what it looked like now, so you can describe it perfectly, or you can find out exactly you can look up anything and find anything, even cities you've never been to or places you've never been. That kind of stuff. So for descriptions, it's like especially helpful for dialogue, for so many things, like because you can actually hear people talking about something if you want to, or you can actually, you know, uh, I guess I try. I like to work either when 2 out of 3 kids are in school, or late at night when everyone in my house is asleep, because then I can just focus on the work and I don't have to do anything else. So I guess a quiet space or a place where I can listen to music is really important. Like, but I don't have such I have my desk is next to a window. I like a window. I like to be able to look out the window. And I like the fresh air.
Love it. What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
Ooh, water? I think that's so boring. I'm sorry. That's such a boring answer. And snack? Oh, anything that's, like, easy to have on your desk that doesn't make a huge mess, like, I like popcorn, I like almonds, I like, dried fruit, like, anything that's as long as it's not sticky dried fruit, like, not raisins, but, like, maybe apricots, dried apricots good, or, like, or sometimes, like, those, like, the Kind bars, like, those kinda things that aren't too sticky are perfect.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
Ooh, a lot of short fiction. I have, like, 9 shelves of short fiction downstairs, lots and lots and lots of short fiction. I just finished reading, let me see if I have it here, Joan Legant's Displaced Persons, which is an amazing collection of short stories. I just finished it yesterday, and I just finished a novel, Other Maps by Rebecca Morris. I'm really excited because I get to interview her for her book launch in Toronto tomorrow night, so I'm really excited about that. So I read novels, but I'll be honest, I mainly read short fiction. I read a lot of short fiction. Um, I just finished, Mariana Enriquez's collection of short stories. That's amazing. Um, yeah, I read a lot of short fiction, and I do read nonfiction, but mostly related to research for what I'm writing, not so much for fun. But I do. Heather O'Neill's new novel is amazing. Ayelet Sabari's new novel is amazing. I just read both of those recently, and they were both really, really, really good.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
I just said Heather O'Neill, so I feel like I can't believe I'm saying this again in the next second. But Heather O'Neill for sure was one of those writers. She wrote this collection, this short story called "I Know Angelo," that was just the most amazing. Zoe Whittall, who's another one of my favorite writers who inspired me to become a writer, her she edited this collection called Geeks, Misfits, and Outlaws, and it has Heather's first short story in it ever. And I loved it, loved it, loved it. I was like, it was the most beautiful, but also totally kicked my ass. And I was like, I'm never gonna write again because I'll never be this good. Like, it was one of those like completely inspiring. Like every single line was beautiful and poetic and lyrical and gorgeous, but also it was gritty and urban, and like it had so many incredible things in it, like and it's about addiction and relationships and all these things, and it was amazing. So uh she was, and Zoe Whittall, so the funniest thing is like even before she wrote fiction, she wrote poetry, and she wrote this collection of poetry called The Best 10 Minutes of Your Life. And I read it and I was like, oh, that really was the best 10 minutes of my life. That was awesome. And her novels are amazing also. And all of her books are amazing. So, and she has a book of short stories called Wild Failure that just came out this year. That's really, really good also. So yeah, those were like two of the big red, but I mean, I have a lot, like all the classic short story writers, the Americans, like Dennis Johnson and Raymond Carver and Cheever, and like like all of those guys were huge inspirations to me in writing short fiction also. David Bismazgis is this Canadian writer, also actually runs the School for Writers program at Humber. He has some collections of short stories, Natasha and Other Stories, and Immigrant City, that were huge influences for me. Like there's I keep like, I keep coming up with short story writers. I keep trying to think if I can think of people that don't write short stories that were big influences, but, and also, like, I feel like it's probably not so surprising in the States, but, like, Laurie Moore is amazing, Grace Paley is amazing, like, there's so many just amazing short fiction writers, Lucia Berlin, like, there's so many, but yeah, like, I remember Zoe Woodall was younger and Canadian, and when I read her stuff, I was like, "Oh, so it is maybe possible to do this." Lynn Crosby is another Canadian writer that was like that for me too. Like I read her stuff and I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever." And then I was also like, "Oh, so maybe I can do this. Like maybe it's possible."
Love that. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
Oh, when I was a kid? Oh, I love Judy Blume like everybody else, I guess. I loved all of her books so much. So in South Africa, I grew up in South Africa. So Enid Blyton was like a really big deal. She wrote these like the famous five series, and like she wrote like she's like you know how the author of those Babysitter Club books had like a million books that were published and it maybe have been written by a team and or something, like, so she was like kind of like that, but she was British.
Okay.
So I liked her stuff, and I loved the Babysitter books also, actually. I think when with kids, like, it's just important to read.
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your
Mhm.
favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
So I went on Heather O'Neill for sure. I feel like Canadian stuff, literary fiction is like for some reason is like a bigger deal in Canada than in the States, it seems like. I don't know why that is. Like I guess they're both like literary fiction writers, but they're both like I don't have to think about it. Like I would just like automatically buy two. They're like without knowing anything. Yeah, Zoe has a new book of poetry actually coming out called No Credit River that's coming out next month, and I've already pre-ordered it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, whatever it was about. What if she wrote it, I would buy it. No, but there's a lot of people whose books I really love that I kind of feel that way about. And you know what? It's been really cool. I've been doing a bunch of tour with amazing writers because you know in every city you read with different writers, local writers, and it's so much fun to do, and then you realize, like, also, like, you love the work so much more, you get exposed to writers whose work you've heard of, but you haven't yet read. So I feel like almost everybody that I've read I was just thinking when I toured in Vancouver, um I read with a writer called Jen Everard, and her first book came out as short story. It's really, really good. Carly Baker is another Vancouver writer who's amazing. We launched together here in Toronto, and I would, in a heartbeat, like buy anything of hers, even before it's out. She's a First Nations Canadian writer. She had two books of short stories that are out, and then she has a novel coming out next year. Like in a second, like I would order her books. Like Shashi Bhatt came to my Vancouver reading, and she's amazing. In a second, so she has a book that's called Death by a Thousand Cuts. That's amazing. Short stories also. One of my favorite books of the year. Like it's her third book. In a second, I would buy her next book. Like tell you right now, I would pre-order it today if I could. Like that's how much I love her writing. There's I've been lucky, like, I've either gotten to read with or had writers whose work I love come to events. Michael Christie is another one of those writers, Susan Sanford Blades is another one of those writers, like, I'm really grateful, like, I got to read with, Karina Chung, like, there's so many, Jen Curran, like, there's so many amazing writers, Lisa Dean, like, there's so in Canada, really lucky. The community is really great and really supportive. Oh, Nora Gold, you had her on the show. Like we did an event in Toronto together. She's great. Like there's been so I feel very grateful and lucky that the community is so supportive of each other and genuinely like I love these writers' work.
Love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Like what would I recommend to read?
What would you tell them if they're thinking about, like, picking up a book again, thinking about reading again, they're not a big reader? Do you have any advice for them?
If they're not a big reader. Reading is supposed to be fun and you're supposed to enjoy it. So just think about the things that you love. And then I could try to help them find a book that based on the things that they find interesting or the things that they love. Like reading should not feel like a job. And don't feel guilty about reading anything. It's really great to read and you should love it and it should be really fun and enjoyable. And that's the point. Like, it's not like if I some people are like, "Oh, it's hard to read literary fiction." I'm like, "No, I love it. It doesn't feel like work. I love it. I feel like I have the best job ever." But, like, if I tried to read in a different genre, I would feel like it was work. Like, you have to enjoy it. You have to love it. No, I genuinely love it. Like, that's what you find things you genuinely love and read them. Like, no guilt. Like, no guilty pleasure, just pleasure. Reading is just supposed to be, like you're just supposed to enjoy yourself and get lost in the world and love what you're reading, you know?
Love that so much. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
First of all, I'd say that's amazing. That's awesome. Um, and it's not, it's hard. It's easy to get intimidated in the beginning, but um, you have to believe in yourself and in your story, and you have to believe in the story that you want to tell. And I think it's really important to believe in the story that you're telling and to be really obsessed with it and be really interested in it is a really, really good thing because that's what you need to do. Like, you have to edit and you have to sit with it and you have to be able to do all those things. I would recommend, um, if you haven't, like, taking some writing classes mainly because it's a great way to meet other writers. or joining writing groups. And I would recommend going to literary events in your local city. Finding out when writers are reading and seeing them read, or like going to workshops or going to things so that you can meet other writers and you can see what the community is like and get a sense of what it's like, because the support of other writers is really important. And if you can find people and be each other's first readers or be in a group with people and exchange work, it really is motivating, because you're not just sitting at home in front of your computer. Like, other people are going to read it and they're going to tell you what they think. And as long as they're kind and respectful and ultimately supportive of your goals, it can be really useful and a really, really good thing to do. Also, another good thing about writing, like talking to other writers, is that they recommend good books to read, especially books that are like related, like books on similar subjects or books that could be helpful in different ways to read. And so, like, that's also really useful. Um, I recommend, yeah, just believing in the work and choosing the right people to give you feedback is really important. And just knowing that, like, every book that you've ever loved started with a draft that the writer didn't love. Like, so just know that that's totally normal, and like know that it can take many drafts, especially with the first book, and then that's totally a normal part of the process.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
About me, like as a person, or like as me as a writer, as a person. You know what? I think I seem a lot more social than I am, but like I love the part of writing that involves being alone and sitting in front of the computer making stuff up for hours. It's totally fine with me. Like, I do love, like, I'm like a extroverted introvert. Like I can seem like fine in social situations or in writing situations, but like especially like social writing situations, because those are your people and like you feel really comfortable. But like I'm totally fine with the solitary nature of reading and writing and those aspects of the job, which surprises people, I think.
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
I'm trying to think. Do you have any more questions for me? It's been such a pleasure to be on the show. You have such great questions.
No, if you wanted, did you want to read any
Sure.
portion?
Sure. How long? Like 5 minutes or less? Like 2 minutes? Like, what do you say?
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be great.
We stood on the edge of the store, half the students edging their way into the narrow doorway. One was taking slow drags of an e-cigarette while her friend looked on, twirling a piece of hot pink hair around her finger, surreptitiously checking out three of the guys who were loitering on the sidewalk, staring at their phones. The last one, a tall, shaggy-haired rock kid with metal studs on his belt, bopping his head so hard one of his wireless headphones flew out. I bent down and handed it to him, and he nodded at me. This last store was just a bonus, and technically, I told them, they could go home now if they wanted to. They were well behaved, so they stayed, dragging their feet, the girls in heavy 90s Redux platforms that looked better than the ones I actually wore in the 90s. So far, nothing has made me feel older than seeing clothing I wore 15 years ago become cool again. They weren't even really my students. My pregnant friend, who was forced into early bed rest, convinced her principal that I'd be the perfect substitute. I was such a mediocre student, I never imagined myself standing in front of a group of kids telling them what to do. I never imagined that they'd actually listen to me. It was the kind of school where the kids could wear and learn whatever they wanted. So when they were into something, they were obsessed. I didn't get obsessed with anything until I was in university. As an undergrad, I started doing large scale acrylic portraits. I used the most vibrant colors I could find, and I loved the thick, expressive textures. In studio courses, you sit with headphones on in your own world for hours. You forget your body, you ignore your hunger cues, you forget everything except each individual brushstroke on the page. My friend Tehila was in the photography stream, but we were both obsessed with faces, with emotions and thoughts you could discover in every line. She took pictures at my first show. It was a group show in a gallery in Parkdale, filled with women in black leather jackets, chunky highlighted hair and wingtip eyeliner, and guys wearing t shirts of bands I'd never heard of, bright tribal tattoos poking out of their sleeves. I made my way towards the food, thin slices of brie and grapes, crushed Melba toast, and sweaty cubes of cheddar. I had two paintings that both sold, and I started to think for the first time, in a real way, that maybe I could be an artist.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah. So, where's the best place for readers to find your books? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option and the best place to connect with you?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to get my books is just a normal place you get books. So you can buy my books on Amazon. You can buy them at Barnes and Noble in the States or Chapters in Canada. You can also get them at all your local independent bookstores in Canada. That would be like Type Books, Ben McNally Books, Book City, those kind of places. In the States, you can order them because we have a really good American distributor. So even if they're not available in store, they can easily order it. And if you look on the individual independent bookstore's website and you Google Danila Botha things that cause inappropriate happiness, you'll find it and they can order it for you.
Amazing. Well, thank you
Oh,
so
sorry.
much.
And sorry, you asked me. Sorry. My website is danilabotha.com, and you can find me on Instagram. It's Danila Botha Verified, and you can find me. I have an author page on Facebook and on X and all that stuff. You can find me everywhere. And by the way, the reason my Instagram is private is because I sometimes post pictures of my kids. Please feel free to add me.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so
Thank
much for
you so
being here
much.
today. We're so
Thank
grateful
you
we
for having
got
me.
to interview you. We'll
Aw,
be sure to drop the links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank
thank
you
you so
so
much.
much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful. It's an honor and a joy to be on your show. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for everything you do for the writing